Hello, this is Mike Oliver with SOA Fundamentals, Agnostic Services. What does that mean? Agnostic services are key to reuse. The key to performance, in general, is doing less processing. So if you build a service that doesn't need to do any processing, it doesn't need to do protocol transformation or data model transformation, it just reads the inputs and writes the outputs, that's going to be the highest performance service you can do. The key to agility is avoiding protocol or data model transformation, because the agility comes from not having to do any additional work. You call a service when you need to call a service. You don't have to prepare for it. You don't have to post-process it. One of the ways to do that in SOA, and probably the most important concept in SOA, is the concept of a standardized service contract with a unified and canonical data model within a service inventory domain. Now, there's a whole set of lessons on that topic, so I'm not going to expound on that too much here, but if you haven't read through the standardized service contract lesson, then you probably ought to go do that now, because that's key to what an agnostic service is. So, a service is considered agnostic if the consumer of the service does not need to know or need to do protocol transformation. In other words, the consumer of the service just calls the agnostic service the way it calls all of the other services within that service inventory. The consumer does not need to do data model transformation. That also is consistent with the standardized service contract and the unified data model, but a service is agnostic if you don't need to do anything before you call it. A service inventory, including the service to be consumed within that domain. So if you have a domain that is special to one department or one business function, then that service inventory should include the service to be consumed, and if it meets all of the other criteria, then it's agnostic. I'll get into the different ways agnostic services are described, but that's the key. The service contract is standardized within the service inventory domain. So if that service, to be agnostic, must adhere to the service contract that is standardized within that service inventory. How to make a service agnostic? I think I've driven that point home, but a standardized service contract is the key to making your services reusable, agile, and agnostic. Composite service wrappers. Nobody has a crystal ball. We're going to build services based on what we know today, and we may not want to go back and re-engineer those services because they're already in production and the impact would be too great. So one way is to then take that service that is agnostic within a particular service inventory, and then you can reuse that service by calling it from outside that service inventory or domain by writing a composite service wrapper that does the necessary adaptation for that service. It's very much the same as taking an API from a commercial off-the-shelf software or some legacy software and wrapping that in a service wrapper. You should make that service wrapper agnostic within your service domain, but it's really the same thing. So if you're going to have a service that is to be shared across domains, you can do a little pre-planning so that the service inventory includes that, and therefore the canonical schema includes that, or you can write a composite wrapper that adapts that. Plan ahead. Now, I know you don't have a crystal ball, you can't foresee every possible occasion, but you can do things that might make it easier. I have used what I call a universal data transfer object that includes a number of fields that are message specific, and every message is going to have them. So therefore, you don't have to reinvent that and put it into every schema, and then you just change the payload. Another thing that you can do is have some unbounded name-value pair arrays. Now, that's not terribly efficient, and that's not the way I would recommend designing from the ground up for. But if you're going to add a service and you don't want to go through and modify your canonical schema, but you do want to access that service, you might consider using a name-value pair for the inputs and outputs. It'll require a little bit of extra processing, but you won't have to go through and change anything else. Now, capability or context. You will hear people talk about something being capability agnostic and others being context agnostic. And it's a very subtle difference. A service is capability agnostic in that the caller of the service need not know how that capability was achieved. So it could be a tax calculation. So that tax calculation is capability agnostic, as you don't need to know how it was implemented. And similarly, a tax calculation that doesn't depend on any particular type of tax can be context agnostic if you pass it parameters like the tax rate and so forth. Now, that's probably oversimplified in that you can do that in code faster than you can call a service, but that's the difference between the two. One is the context agnostic, means you can call that service from anywhere, any context, any service domain, and it'll function the same way. Capability agnostic means you don't need to know the internals of it. Thank you very much. I hope this was beneficial for you.